Hello, welcome to another episode of the History of Comic Books podcast. And it's your friendly neighborhood host, JT Wheatley, here again for the concluding chapter of the life of Stan Lee. When we last left off, Stan Lee was about to fall into a full-blown celebrity himself, and a lot of that started with his eventful trip to Carnegie Hall. On December of 1971, Stan Lee appeared in an event at Carnegie Hall in celebration of himself. However, despite the eclectic lineup of guests from actors like Peter Boyle and writer like Tom Wolfe, the audience came out bored and was a complete disaster. Not deterred, though, Lee continued his work promoting Marvel, and it was around this time the phrase House of Ideas was coined. Then, in 1972, he was made president when Martin Goodman left the company and absolutely hated it. While as an editor-in-chief, he dreamed of one day being in control of the finances he had to fight over. Once Stan Lee was put in charge of them, he discovered that's all he did, and he had no creative control whatsoever. He chose instead to focus on being just a publisher of Marvel, while Roy Thomas became Marvel's new editor-in-chief. While Lee still pursued creative avenues, he finished directly writing with Amazing Spider-Man number 110 on July of 1972, being the last issue he wrote for the series, along with Fantastic Four number 125 of August of 1972, with Jerry Conway taking over both. Nevertheless, he was still worried about Marvel's finances, especially once he saw the books himself. As a publisher, he tried to branch out with Marvel with Crazy in October of 1973, a ripoff of Mad Magazine with the moniker Stan Lee Presents, and Marv Wolfman as editor. Also, as part of the Electric Company TV show, Spidey's Super Stories were produced from 1974 to 1975. In 1976, Stan Lee had Marvel partner with the noted underground comics publisher Kitchen Sink Press with a new venture, Comics Book, but it only lasted 2 issues. Kitchen Sink would later acquire the books for 2 more issues, with the partnership dissolved. Lee also tried another hand at an old love of his, newspaper strips. Over the years, he had created strips like Mrs. Lyons Club and Willie Lumpkin with Jack Kirby, but neither lasted long. Lumpkin would soon become a supporting character in the Fantastic Four, first appearing in issue number 11 on February of 1973, and Stan Lee would even play him in a cameo in the 2005 Fantastic Four movie. On October of 1976, Stan Lee tried again, creating The Virtue of Vera Valiant, a strip with Frank Springer. It was a satire of television soap operas, with the title character being involved in the oddest love triangle, having fallen in love with a man who went into a coma on his honeymoon. It was a mix of Lee's dry wit and madcap sass, along with a bit of the macabre. The opening strip deals with Vera's brother Herbert botching a suicide attempt, and would run for 14 years. In 1977, Lee went with a strip closer to his heart when he started the Spider-Man newspaper strip, which launched in 100 newspapers but soon would reach 400 worldwide by the next year. However, Lee had a hard time writing a daily strip with his many other jobs at Marvel. Nevertheless, his success did prompt the Tribune to ask DC to produce their own strip. Another venture that Stan Lee tried was the Marvel Fireside books with Simon & Schuster Publishing, where they produced 11 books from 1974 to 1977. Among them was The Origins of Marvel Comics in September of 1974 and Superhero Women in 1977, where Lee tried to explain women and characters in comic books. In 1978, a new Fantastic Four cartoon was created, with writing by Stan Lee and Roy Thomas, along with art by Jack Kirby, who had once again returned to the company after his 5-year stint at DC. Kirby even worked with Stan Lee on the Silver Surfer graphic novel The Ultimate Cosmic Experience on September of 1978, published by Fireside Books. However, one expansion of Marvel that Lee hated was the live-action Spider-Man TV series from 1978 to 1979, along with the Captain America TV movie to 1979 as well. He did like the CBS Incredible Hulk show from 1977 to 1982, though. Nevertheless, the influx of comic book TV shows led to Time magazine to speculate in a 1979 article that Stan Lee was responsible for turning TV into one big electronic comic book. Not all was rosy, though, as in 1979 as well, the New York Times ran an article by Anna Kleinfeld that addressed Marvel's financial and creative woes, along with attacking the new editor-in-chief, Jim Shooter. The article did praise Lee as a creative genius, but stated he was beneath comics. Lee would call the article total garbage, but did admit one of the allegations that licensing their products was now more important for the company. Nevertheless, Lee was doing well personally, as his annual salary with Marvel was $150,000 a year, plus the work he was getting with college speeches and TV consulting. With his work moving him away from comic books and more toward TVs and films, Stan Lee decided to move to Hollywood to help further develop them. He even tried his Marvel method on screenlining for films with The Night of the Witch, about a hero witch. He worked with Lloyd Kaufman, the future founder of Troma Entertainment, known for The Toxic Avenger, among others, who he had met at Yale on a speaking tour. The script was picked up for $500, but never made. Lee later tried again with The Man Who Talked to God, but that was never made either, which he had worked with Alan Renee on, but later admitted it was impossible to adapt. Finally, Lee did set up a Marvel office at 4610 Van Vancies Boulevard in Sherman Oaks with Excelsior, Latin meaning ever upward or still higher, which Lee was using as his trademark phrase, signed at the door. Called Marvel Productions, the new studio team with producers such as Fred Silverman, legendary TV producer of Charlie's Angels and Roots, with Lee wanting to focus on cartoons as he thought that was the best medium for adapting the comic books. Some example of this was the Meatballs and Spaghetti cartoon, which aired on CBS's Saturday morning cartoon block, along with the Dungeons and Dragons, an animated adaptation of the classic fantasy game. Lee also served as narrator and consultant of the new Spider-Man and Hulk cartoons. Reportedly, Lee hated being a narrator, but the fans loved it, as hearing the actual voice of the creator of Spider-Man and Hulk helped sell the story. Soon, Lee was also pitching demos of comic readers for studios. As a result of the success of the Incredible Hulk TV show, Lee inadvertently returned to comics when he learned that the show was planning to create a female Hulk. Not wanting such a character created outside of Marvel, as the company wanted to own the copyright, he wrote The Savage Sea-Hulk #1 in February of 1980 with John Buscema doing the art, with her origin being that of the cousin of Bruce Banner, Jennifer Walters, who inherits her cousin's Hulk powers when she receives a blood transfusion from him after being grievously injured. While meant so Marvel could own the character, it was also an attempt to draw female fans to comic books, though it only lasted for 2 issues. By the mid-'80s, Stan Lee was out of the day-to-day operations of Marvel, now carrying the title of Vice President of Creative Affairs. He was also getting $3,000 per appearance for college speaking fees. However, his self-promotion led to some problems when he forgot to acknowledge the co-creators of many of his works, such as Jack Kirby and Steve Ditko. In 1986, he wrote Spidey and Me, an essay about his work on the Spider-Man, which was included in the Best of Spider-Man book of that year. Then, in a brilliant bit of self-promotion, he served as Justice in the Peace to the marriage of Peter Parker and Mary Jane Watson at Shea Stadium to a crowd of 55,000 people, who were already on hand to see the reigning World Series champions, the New York Mets, play, of which Peter Parker, being a kid from Queens, was a fan of. New World, Marvel's new owners, also pushed Lee to make numerous public appearances. The company had purchased Marvel from Cadence in 1986, and like the previous deal, required as part of the sale for Stan Lee to be signed to a long-term contract, as he was still seen as the face of Marvel. In 1989, Marvel celebrated its 50th anniversary. Of interesting note, President Ronald Reagan admitted in an interview he enjoyed reading the comic strips in the paper first before getting to the deeper stuff, and noted Spider-Man as one of his favorites, which Lee enjoyed. Meanwhile, in 1994, Marvel was bought out once again, and one of the executives, Bill Blevins, named Stan Lee the head of Marvel Films and promptly tripled his salary. That same year, Lee edited The Ultimate Spider-Man, a collection of short stories by a number of different writers. In it, he claimed to have gotten the idea for Spider-Man in watching a spider climbing on a wall and wondered what a superhero would be like with those powers. Lee also revised the origin with Aunt May now having a fear of spiders, while the one that bit Peter was originally in Dr. Otto Octavius' lab, who of course is Dr. Octopus. He did include a dedication of Spider-Man's creator, Steve Ditko, with Dedicated to Steve Ditko, who was there from the beginning. Meanwhile, Stan Lee became friends with James Cameron, the famed director of the Terminator films, who had become interested in making a Spider-Man movie. Unfortunately, Marvel went into bankruptcy in 1996, which scared off many potential studios in developing films of their properties. Cameron did produce a story treatment, which was widely panned when it was leaked on the internet. Lee still continued to work with Marvel in pushing new mediums, this time the emerging internet. However, after decades at Marvel, Stan Lee decided it was time to set out on his own. Thus, in January of 1999, he established Stan Lee Media Incorporated with Peter F. Paul, with a $30 million investment and the intention of starting a whole new comics universe. Marvel wasn't quite ready to let him go, though, and he was made chairman emeritus, but he still felt it was slighted since it was mostly an honorary title. Lee also thought the Ike Permillers, who held the controlling interest in ownership of Marvel at the time, offer was insulting, as it was half his original salary. Ultimately, Marvel realized the value of Lee in not having him go on to rival publisher like DC, so attorney Arthur Lieberman offered a new deal of $800,000 a year plus $125,000 for his Spider-Man strip, along with a $500,000 pension guaranteed to his wife Joanne in the event of his death. On top of all that, he would receive 10% stake in all future film and TV projects. Plus, Lee was allowed an escape clause to allow him to actually work on other projects outside the company. However, Lee's new business partner, Peter F. Paul, was shady at best, having previously served time in a jail for defrauding the Cuban government in cocaine possession in the 1970s. Originally sentenced to 8 years in prison, he was paroled after serving just 3, but then in 1983 was caught trying to sneak into Canada using a false identity and properly returned to prison. Upon completing his sentence, he moved to California, where he became a business manager to numerous celebrities, such as the romance cover model Fabio, along with being the single largest campaign donor to Hillary Clinton's 2000 senatorial run in New York City. Reportedly, he was trying to get former President Bill Clinton to serve on the Stan Lee Media's board and wooed him with no less than the Hollywood Farewell Gala salute to President William Jefferson Clinton, featuring numerous entertainers and celebrities singing his praises, while also raising $1 million for his wife Hillary's Senate campaign. However, this event would also come back to haunt Paul, as he reported it cost $1.9 million to throw, but the Federal Election Commission estimated it was just $500,000, and much of it fraudulently borrowed from Merrill Lynch. This was just an ominous sign of things to come. Nevertheless, Stan Lee set up a new office in Enrico, California with Peter F. Paul and founded StanLeeNet.net. Soon, his new company was part of a reverse merger with Boulder Capital Opportunities Incorporated under the SLEE. Lee received stock of 6 million shares and an annual salary of $272,500. The new company soon had 150 employees. One of the company's first creations was the Seventh Portal, a superhero team tasked with battling villains through a hidden gateway. They were also proposing a clothing line inspired by Stan Lee's many catchphrases. On February 29, 2000, they debuted a website at Raleigh Studios in North Carolina, with Dick Clark hosting along with guests Ray Charles, Jerry Lewis, and Chaka Khan. There was even a plan for 3D rides at Paramount Parks. Soon the company attracted the attention of celebrities like the Backstreet Boys and Mary J. Blige, who would later appear in a cameo in the 2002 Spider-Man movie. In 2000, its shares were valued at $31, with $350 million in total value. During all this, a weird side moment came about when the pop star Michael Jackson wanted to buy Marvel, which is still recovering from bankruptcy, and have Stan Lee run it. Reportedly, he agreed to do it, but the deal was never made. Meanwhile, StanLee.net was reportedly spending $26 million annually compared to $1 million in revenue, showing signs of trouble. By December of 2000, the company was bankrupt and subject to investigation by both the FBI and the SEC. Lee was never the focus of the investigation, as the agent's target was Peter F. Paul. The increased scrutiny did have a negative impact on Lee, who reportedly collapsed due to the stress of the investigation. Stephen McGorder, the vice president of Paul, was also part of the stock swindle and sentenced to 6.5 years in prison. Later it was revealed that Paul had forged Lee's signature on several documents. On February 16, 2001, the company filed for bankruptcy in the U.S. Bankruptcy Court in the Central District of California. By August of 2002, the company was officially dissolved by the California Secretary of State. Paul fled to Brazil but was imprisoned on August 2001 for 2 years. They finally extradited to the U.S. on September of 2003, accused of defrauding the company of $25 million. In 2005, he pled guilty and spent 4 years under house arrest. By 2009, he had spent 10 years at a federal institution in Anthony, Texas, before finally being paroled in 2014. While Stan Lee was never implicated in any wrongdoing, the news that came out about his role at the company was placed him in a negative light, reports of him sleeping through meetings and ignoring company finances. Lee kept going, and in 2001, Stan Lee went to work for Marvel's distinguished competition, DC, a nickname he coined for them decades ago, with Michael Uslan on a series of 13 one-shots called Just Imagine, which Stan Lee would reimagine classic DC characters from Superman to The Flash based only on their names, working with such notable artists as John Buscema, Jim Lee, and Joe Kubert. Grant Morrison would later incorporate the line of the greater DC multiverse into his series The Multiversity in 2014 to 2015, christening them as part of Earth-6. As also in 2001, Stan Lee formed a new company with Joe Champion and Arthur Lieberman called POW, Purveyors of Wonder, to develop film, TV, and video game properties. One notable product that came from this was the cartoon show Stripolella for Spike TV, a cartoon superhero satire about the Erotica Jones, voiced by Pamela Anderson, who has a superhero guise as a superhero secret agent. The series lasted only one season, from June 26, 2003 to April 1st, 2004 for 13 episodes, but received surprisingly positive reviews, noting its tongue-in-cheek humor. In 2004, Lee took POW public. In 2000